Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. If you've ever studied a second language, you've probably run into this dizzying array of tests, certificates, and metrics that all try to measure exactly how good you are. Well, today, we're demystifying fluency itself by unpacking the ultimate gold standard in language assessment, the CEFR.
So, what does it actually mean to be fluent? Like, if I asked you right this second to mentally place yourself on a fluency scale, where would you land? You might be thinking, well, I can order a coffee in Spanish just fine, but there's no way I could read a newspaper. To solve this exact kind of ambiguity, educators created this whole alphabet soup of language levels that you've probably seen floating around. A1, B2, C1. Today, we're going to decode exactly what those letters and numbers really mean for you. Okay. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the global language benchmark, decoding the 6 levels, the timeline to fluency, action-oriented language learning, comparing global proficiency scales, and finally moving beyond the native speaker. All right, let's dive right in. Section 1, the global language benchmark. We really need to start by understanding where modern language assessment actually comes from. So, CEFR. It stands for the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Basically, it's a globally recognized guideline established by the Council of Europe. Its main goal is to provide a universal, totally standardized method of teaching and assessing language achievements. Whether you're learning German in Tokyo or English in Brazil, the CEFR gives educators and employers a common vocabulary to understand exactly what you're capable of doing in that language. Now, this framework didn't just magically appear overnight. It actually started way back between 1986 and 1989 as a Council of Europe project, which was focused on language learning for European citizenship. Fast forward to 1991, at a Swiss symposium in Rüschlikon, they definitively identified the need for a common framework to help teachers cooperate across borders. Finally, in 2001, the European Union Council formally recommended the CEFR, and since then, it has completely exploded from a European initiative into a truly global standard. Moving on to the really fun stuff. Section 2, decoding the 6 levels. As we go through these next couple of slides, I want you to mentally try and self-diagnose your own language skills. So the framework chops things up into 3 broad categories, starting with the basic user, or the A levels. A1 is basically your survival mode. You can introduce yourself, ask some basic personal details, that kind of thing. But what's really interesting is the jump to A2. At A2, you start understanding frequently used expressions and can actually handle simple routine tasks. Think shopping or navigating local geography. It's super practical and concrete. Next up, we hit the independent user, the B levels. B1 is where things get a bit more personal. You can describe your hopes and dreams and handle most travel situations. But B2 is totally the sweet spot for a lot of learners. At B2, you can interact with fluency and spontaneity without it feeling like a massive strain for either person in the conversation. You can grasp the main ideas of complex texts. Honestly, this is very often the baseline level required for university admission or jumping into a professional workplace. And finally, we reach the absolute highest tier of mastery, the proficient user, or C levels. At C1, you're tackling demanding, longer clauses and expressing ideas really flexibly for academic purposes. And C2? That is the absolute pinnacle. At C2, you understand virtually everything with total ease. You can summarize complex arguments from multiple sources and express yourself precisely, differentiating the tiniest, finest shades of meaning, even in highly complex situations. But okay, the million-dollar question. How much time does all of this actually take? Let's get into Section 3, the timeline to fluency, and shift from theory to cold, hard time commitments. Take a look at these estimates. They come from major educational bodies and show the cumulative hours of guided instruction you'd need to hit specific CEFR levels, assuming you already speak a European language. Notice how reaching a B1 or B2 level is surprisingly consistent across German, French, and English, hovering right around that 350 to 650 hour mark. But look closely at that C2 column. French and English require well over 1,000 hours of dedicated instruction to truly master. This really puts it into perspective, right? It brilliantly illustrates the totally exponential effort required to hit C2, using Cambridge assessments data for English. Getting to A1 is essentially a quick sprint of about 90 to 100 hours. Reaching that B2 sweet spot is a solid 500 to 600 hour commitment. But then, to climb that final mountain from B2 to C2, you are basically doubling your total lifetime study hours, reaching up to 1,200 hours. The journey from independent to proficient is incredibly steep.
All right, let's step out of the spreadsheets for a second and into the actual classroom. Section 4, Action-Oriented Language Learning. How do teachers take these abstract hours and levels and actually apply them? To kind of wrap our heads around this, let's look at the Canadian Association of Second Language Teachers, or CASLT. In their 2025 Action-Oriented Approach Toolkit, they emphasize that teaching has to align learning and assessment with real-world action. The CFR isn't just about memorizing boring verb tables in a textbook. It's entirely about what you can actually do with the language socially. Here are two awesome concrete examples straight from that toolkit. For an A1 learner, a class task isn't just read chapter 4 on animals. The actual task is adopting a family pet, where learners have to use their basic vocabulary to satisfy a concrete need. For an A2 scenario, learners might group together to organize a viewing party for a francophone music event. This is the CEFR in action, folks. Abstract definitions transformed into concrete, action-oriented social tasks. Now that we've seen what this looks like in action, let's zoom back out to the big picture. Section 5, Comparing Global Proficiency Scales. Because, the CEFR isn't the only game in town. Over in the US, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, or ACTF, is a huge deal. Looking at how they align, an A1 roughly corresponds to the ACTL's novice tiers, while our B2 sweet spot maps to their advanced tier. What the experts note here is that ACTL is generally considered a bit stricter when evaluating receptive skills, like listening and reading, compared to the CEFR. But ultimately, they're parallel frameworks describing the exact same human journey toward proficiency. Okay, let's head into our final section today, Section 6, Beyond the Native Speaker. We're going to look at an evolution that pushes language learning completely beyond the old concept of the native speaker. So, the framework isn't just some static, dusty document sitting on a shelf since 2001. Back in 2020, the Council of Europe released the CEFR Companion Volume, and this was a major update. It actively redefines the underlying construct of the entire framework. It places this massive, renewed emphasis on inclusivity and explicitly defines language primarily as social action. It completely embraces online interaction, plurilingual competence, and sign languages. And this is a really fascinating philosophical shift. The original 2001 framework occasionally referenced native speaker standards, and it viewed mediation mostly as a cognitive thing, like, can you translate or summarize a text? The 2020 framework completely axes the references to a native speaker standard. Instead, it elevates something called relational mediation, moving away from just individual cognitive processing and focusing heavily on creating cooperative environments. To really grasp how radical this shift is, just listen to this quote from the 2020 companion volume about C2, the absolute highest level. It says, intelligibility and effective conveyance and enhancement of meaning are not affected in any way by features of accent that may be retained from other languages. Literally, this means that even at the absolute peak of language proficiency, retaining your native accent is officially viewed as completely disconnected from your mastery of the language. And that brings us right back to that core 2020 update, relational mediation. Basically, it's the process of establishing and maintaining interpersonal relationships to create a cooperative environment. According to the modern CEFR, fluency isn't just about flawless grammar or sounding exactly like you were born in a specific country. Fluency is officially recognized as your ability to foster human connection, facilitate understanding, and cooperate socially. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought today. With fluency officially redefined by global standards around human connection and intelligibility, rather than, chasing some perfect native accent, how does this change your own language learning goals? Does it take a bit of the pressure off? Does it change why you're studying in the first place? Thank you so much for exploring the fascinating world of the CEFR with me today. Keep learning, keep connecting, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.